Hey, so I've got these. I always like to put some heads up here, BC. And this morning I used these two guys because they're going to become famous, I think, over time for not specifically wanting to talk about individual players. Like that's kind of my thing. I think Coach Butler is going to talk about his unit kind of as a unit until games
Mhm.
actually unfold. And Coach Solich was notorious for that. How do you like so far in the brief times that we've gotten a chance to hear from Coach Butler? You're one of the guys that's notorious for being not notorious, that is famously known for being a good question asker. Do you have a feel for where you think he likes to go and where he's comfortable going in that setting?
Um, I think he will really expound on an answer, and we didn't ask enough about it yesterday. About just the generalities of the joy of coaching football and like building up players and developing players. Like you heard it sort of in his last answer when he was asked about that magic moment as a coach when you take a guy, maybe he's a younger player, he's a guy who wasn't quite there a season ago, and you see it start to, the light starts to come on for him and what that's like. And then, he got into an explanation of a player they drafted in the 6th round who just signed a huge deal in the NFL. I think stuff like that could bring out deeper answers from him. I just think right now there's sort of a mission, and I understand it, to not let everybody lay out the too deep publicly. Like and nor is it easy to do just 5 practices into the spring, but even to get started on that trail of doing so, everybody wants to do it. Like even in the capsules people write before spring ball starts, there's usually a line like who's maybe the front line, who can compete for it. And I just think they don't want to go there. There's probably a variety of reasons. One, for just it's a something a lot of coaches do, and two, with the portal opening up, in a couple weeks, it's something you think about too, about putting guys' names out there too much. So I get what's happening.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
BC. So yeah, I'm curious here. How much do you think is legitimately trying to shield guys from the portal, and how much is like maybe they just don't? Maybe they've seen us as the media run with things too often that
Mhm.
like, hey, let's dial it back here and not because I don't know. I feel I have a hard time buying that if somebody doesn't know about a kid already, that talking about him in a press conference is going to be the thing that attracts another school to.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
No, I'm with you, Ravi. I think of the 2 points I made, I think it's the one you're talking about that's the biggest deal. It's just like we don't need to roll through this and have the hype machine go full speed on certain guys. And they've got a bunch of newer guys where that can happen. Like, if a couple questions get asked, I'm just using this as an example about like Williams Unari, and you say a couple nice comments, just to get through the answer. That can feed a couple weeks of stories in this state and talk. So it's examples like that I think of. Like a Dasan McCullough. They've been asked multiple times about him, and the answers have been kept, pretty short and to the point. I don't take that as a bad sign for McCullough or anything. I think it's just like let's not feed the beast maybe going on. And I understand that. Of course, we're on the other side of it, so you like when the answers go a little longer on certain guys. And there are individual stories like I'm really interested in where I do think coaches will bite. Like I asked about Elijah Judy yesterday just because he was coming up to the microphone and I knew he was going to be one of the guys. So you're writing a story about him. And I think Elijah's got like an interesting background and like how he's developed as a person and a player in his time at Nebraska. So I think there's some stuff like that hopefully comes out throughout the offseason where maybe if it isn't laying out the too deep, it's at least sort of getting insights on certain guys' personalities that are new to the roster, and maybe coaches will expound a little more on that as we get further into it.
BC, you're in a similar vein, so I think you'll have good recall. Since the changing of defensive coordinators, Coach Rhule has been fairly specific about wanting a guy with answers and can be multiple and a problem solver and being able to evolve as a defense. When you look at kind of the transition so far from T. White to Coach Butler, are you starting to get a feel, given a couple of the answers yesterday, on looks, guys, kind of how multiple you think Nebraska wants to be? And I say that because I remember Coach Rhule was pretty animate when looking for a new coordinator. He said he liked the way Nebraska practiced and prepared, so he was reluctant to want to really mess with that. Are you kind of getting a feel for where the direction they want to move?
A little bit. I thought Javen Wright had an interesting answer, sort of in the middle of his interview. He was talking about how John Butler is unique. He's like, you got to really know your football with him. Was the gist of it. Like you've got to just inside and out kind of be that guy who studies the game and immerses yourself in it, because that's the way he is. And I think we heard that from Marquise Buford actually too. Like just how this guy is all football and like the the knowledge that he's gained from him. So I think with that, some players as they grow can maybe take some of the base stuff and then you can elevate to more complex things like third down. You heard John Butler talk about like, I've got some things in my past. I think it helps that he was like in the NFL where you do, I think, have to obviously have some complexities to your defense to trick quarterbacks at that level. And so maybe there's some stuff that he can sprinkle in from there. And then he mentioned Phil Snow's got stuff that's been good on third down. And Terry Braden, he talked about like he's been part of a championship organization. And so I got the sense without him getting real specific, he's going to lean on the knowledge of guys too. Like this guy's got a good idea over here that can work with something that I have done in the past. And you kind of mix those things together over time and you can have a nice blend. But we'll see. I obviously if he's not going to name names, he wasn't going to get too detailed about like what they're going to do on third down. But I do think you got the sense like I'm going to have my ears open to what other guys have done in the past too as we put this together.
BC, I'm curious how you sort of processed and how you took Butler's comments about Phil Snow and their relationship and sort of his role in what's happening on the defense.
I mean, I just thought I guess it was the answer I would expect. It's just like, you've got this guy, he joked that's coached for 100 years, like you'd be a fool not to use that. Like he mentioned when he was with the Texans, Romeo Crennel, got moved to like a senior assistant type position within that operation. And that's a guy who's coached a lot of great football and knows a lot of things. And so I think there's very much a mindset over there with the coaching staff. You hear it from the head coach to the OC to Butler of you're always learning. Like the players are doing it, but so are we. And there's guys around you that have ideas and coach a certain way that is maybe something I can pick up from too. Like John Butler mentioned, watching Phil Snow, like coaching freshman defensive backs and just how there was something like I can take something from that. And I've coached DBs in the NFL for a decade. So I just think I got from that answer. It's like have an open mind to guys who have done stuff a long time and have other ideas and also can confirm ideas that I may have. And so that's sort of what I took.
BC, when you're talking about kind of the evolution, because it seems going into this deal, and I get it, there's multiple reasons, right? That the loss of some key contributors on the D line, a guy or two on the back end with Bullock and Giff, and then the new staff members. Are you getting the sense that coming into this one, there's more questions on defense or the evolution of the offense as kind of our spring fling?
Mm-hmm. I think on the outside, there's actually more questions on defense for the reasons you lay out, just because, I mean, everybody always goes to that D line and replacing the guys they're replacing, but also just all the different coaches and how that blends together. But it is an interesting question because maybe that's how it looks on paper. Like that's the side with more question marks because of all the replacements, but it's also been the side that Matt Rhule's teams have typically been just really solid at, and he does tend to find a way to have stout units that come together, and he has a tendency to have really good defensive lines and all that sort of stuff. So that is an interesting poll there, because I think my answer is defense to your question, but yet I sort of just have a belief in, because of Rhule's track record and the coaches he's hired and the success they've had, that they'll end up being pretty good. But being pretty good, I think you can tell from their comments that that's not the goal. They want to be a top unit, and the differentiator to be a top group is be that team that hardly gives up a touchdown in the red zone. You know, if you're that type of unit, you can give up a few yards here and there. You can give up a third down on occasion, but if you bow up inside the 20-yard line, it changes everything. And so I think there's a good reason why that's been emphasized. And also, you know, in our first game, we saw John Butler as DC. They did really well in the red zone too. So, that's an area that and being more complex on third down, I think they feel like if we can be a few percentage points better in that stat, hike it up a little bit in red zone touchdown defense, that's a formula to, winning 2 more games at the end of the year than you did.
It's interesting, especially listening to you. I go back to Coach Snow, some of his comments where he talked about so many of the things that he liked from a year ago, but he wanted to improve defensively. And he even got a little bit specific, like with some of the looks where he said, we want to show pressures and maybe mug a little bit, which is kind of this terminology where guys are on the line of scrimmage. They're in close proximity. They can get out and bail, or they can get after you. He wants to be aggressive and cause confusion. Coach Butler says, well, you got to affect the quarterback, right? You have to – that's the guy you have to stop. You want to give him different looks. You can tell when you're piecing this thing together. For as young as this staff is and working together, they are definitely on the same page in terms of what the overall game plan is for this defense to continue to improve.
Yeah, and you know what? They're talking about stats where it wasn't like they're horrible. It wasn't like they're even middling. Like, I think, I hope I'm right on this. I think on third down defense, they were top 30, it felt like. Red zone defense wasn't bad, but it's a coaching staff that I think, they want to be top 10, top 15 in those. And they know that if you want to be an elite team playing in the type of games they want to be playing in November and December, those are 2 stats that tell everything. There's a lot of talk within this staff about winning time, whether it's on defense and third down and being that group that finishes plays. Like, that was one of the things that stood out about Butler yesterday, was the finishing aspect. And that goes to third down, red zone defense. And then, I thought it was interesting. I'm going to write about this today. Dana and Dylan just talking about sort of thinking through the 2-minute offense, and Dylan watching back all those games, like where they didn't have that final drive. And there's definitely that thought, like, last year the whole thing was about chasing 3, but it's those moments. It's that third down defense. It's that drive with 2.5 minutes left at the horseshoe when you got a chance to have a statement win where execution's just got to be really good, and you have to trust and believe you're going to go do it. And so it makes sense that there's such an emphasis on these things, because that's what this team is going to need to change it and have close stop being a bad word around here.
BC, you mentioned a minute ago the track record of Rhule, and obviously we talked about Phil Snow. He's got an extensive track record. Addison Williams has a less extensive track record, but you've got a lot of guys in that room with these proven track records. Does it surprise you at all, or does it make sense that within that context, we really haven't talked that much about John Butler's lack of a track record in doing the job he's about to be asked to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question until it isn't. Every time a guy steps into a role like that, where he knows that when the season comes, if there's a bad week, you're going to take all the arrows as a coordinator. I do think, if John Butler had just been hired as the DC like a year ago before even coaching the secondary at Nebraska, and people just looked at his resume, though, people would have nodded their heads, and we tend to do that around here, but I think they would have been like, I can see it, like, because of he was up for that Bills DC job. Like, he was kind of in the running for it a year before, and obviously they were a really good football team, and he had such good success with his secondary. But I think it's fair, Ravi, to ask, like, okay, this is kind of his first. It's not his first time. I guess he did a little at Penn State, but he hasn't had like a deep DC background, so there's a curiosity there. But that's why I also think it's good that he's got experience where he does, but he has these other guys who have been in those roles, and I think that's where you have the benefit of like someone like Phil Snow. I don't see this as a bad thing at all. It's like a guy who's done it for decades that you can lean on for ideas or confirm ideas. Addison Williams has been in key roles. Terry Braden's been around championship football. Dvorak knows Rhule since he was a player, since Dvorak was. So all these guys bring a little different something. And Butler mentioned that at one point the other day. So I think he's a guy who he has his ideas, but he's not too proud to listen to guys. He said that's going to be a no ego operation.
BC, I want you to think about kind of some of the personnel that Nebraska has right now, kind of where Coach Butler's been. I'm going to play a clip for you, and I want you to let me know if you think you can see the correlation of how it's coming together. Shane, play clip 9 for me, please.
That's a good question. I haven't really ever thought about that. There was definitely some things that were different about coaching DBs just in general in the NFL to college. The number one thing, you're coaching men versus you're coaching younger men. I think Matt was helpful in that with transition with me. And like, you really got to look at it like in college, you're really still training them to how to play. Where in the NFL, you're really coaching them. That was a good learning point for me to kind of like that I picked up from him saying, and I do believe that. So I think it's just, they're just not as experienced. That's all it is. So you're just trying to provide as much experience and as much exposure to the things that they're going to see. And that's why it's so important to get practice and have walkthroughs and have meetings, because that's how you develop them in that regard.
BC, when I heard that, I thought, that if he gives that answer a year ago, we are much more receptive to him being named defensive coordinator versus a year later. And because when he first was hired, it was, oh, man, did you see how the DBs played? But he's admitting the learning curve. And once again, we hear a current coach talk about the impact that Coach Rhule's philosophy and teaching has had on them real time.
Yeah, and I also think the answer tells you how valuable it was to have one runway year where he wasn't the DC, and he could kind of take all that in from the position that he had. And I remember he gave a similar answer. It was on like the Husker Radio Network show when they have a coach on in like November. And he actually mentioned Caleb as an example. It's just like Caleb's a young guy where he's not going to know what Micah Hyde knows, as a 28, 29-year-old. And I have to remind myself of that. And he mentioned Coach Rhule kind of helping him along at that point too. And so it didn't surprise me that he said that, but I do think that's probably a point that should be emphasized, what he got out of last year. And it's like, okay, it is a different type of coaching is coaching, but when they're different age groups, sometimes you have to process it a little differently with where a guy's at. And I think by the end of the year, last year, with the DBs that he was working with, he said, I realized after all that, I had like 5 or 6 guys that it's like, man, they've really made the progress when I look at it through that way of, hey, they're just a young player and it was their first year. And so now you build on that again into the second and see what you got. But it has to be a big adjustment too, going from the NFL to college coaching in that way that we don't always think about. And I think it was good for him that he got to experience that.
It's why I don't always appreciate or kind of roll my eyes sometimes when people aren't as in on off-season talk and winning the off-season, all this little anecdotal funny stuff we talk about now as a frustrated fan base that doesn't get wins in the fall. Because BC, I hear this answer, and I don't know if it's the coach in me. I don't know if it's the player dad in me. I don't know if it's the player in me. It's probably all three. When grown men can be vulnerable like that and just open up to the learning process and learning from another peer and the importance of that and give real examples of how it matters. As a player, you can't help but to feel that. You can't help but to see it. And in a team like this that's developing culturally and emotionally, man, I think it's crucial. Like, I don't think you can get to embracing one score tight knit stuff without that being a part of it.
Yeah, if I were a player and I heard that, that would make me feel good. It's like this guy's learning just like I'm learning in different ways about his craft, And so when a coach is open about that, like this was a spot I grew in, I have to think that's really good for your locker room for guys that hear it. And I love the off-season talk too. I mean, I do sometimes actually think, this is not a popular opinion, I think some of the stories in the media and stuff it's viewed as like, oh, they're always hyping up this team. I'm always interested in the stuff I write being about sort of a team developing, and whether that's good enough to beat Michigan in September, I don't know. And I'm not saying it is, but I'm always interested when you hear a name or you hear guys that are growing. And we haven't heard a lot of names yet this spring. But let's say there's an Amari Sanders or a Caleb Benning who's growing and growing into a role. Like, I love those type of stories, and then we'll see how that stacks up against other teams. So I think people need to take the offseason talk sometimes and see it more as it's more about figuring out like who is those 50 to 50 guys who are going to play, who's developing, how are they growing, and then when we get to the fall, we'll see how that translates. So that's me getting on the pulpit there.
Listen, I don't know if they do the two-handed ones anymore, but I'm like giving you an air fist pump from far away because I think it's exactly what this team needs. And you could tell just being around them. And you saw this in one-on-ones. If I had one big takeaway so far, and I heard Coach Rhule intimate it, and then I got a chance to pit it against what I saw, when he said, the guys get it. The leadership, they kind of know where to be. They kind of know how to practice. This is kind of more about me with my coaches, to be honest, learning what we want. My one big takeaway so far is their ability to cheer for one another at the same position groups and spur one another on. They're not going to win anything close or anything meaningful until that becomes a way of life, right? It has to be a lifestyle and not just a behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the best point of the whole segment right there. I'm not going to top that. I mean, that's what it's going to be. I mean, you got like the DBs, you have 27, 28 guys, but if you have that competitive nature, but also like wanting to push the guy next to you, like I want him to be better while I'm getting better, and you're happy when that guy is better. That's everything. So we'll see if they can get that. It sounds like it's building the right way. And that's definitely encouraging, because I think that is one of the biggest pieces to stepping up, moving up a couple rungs.
That's our guy.
Fantastic, BC.
Husker247. We appreciate it. As always, BC.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, buddy.